So the last thing that Iyanla does on day one is speak to Erica, the mother. And Iyanla asks her, is she disconnected from herself or is she dishonest? Because she says she's come here for something else. And yet other things are coming up about how she has set it up in her home that people do not feel safe around her and walk around her as if on eggshells. And asks her, what do you call silent treatment? And she talks about, well, if something is not going well with the children and I'm still processing it, so I'm just within my own mind and processing it. I'm quiet and I'm thinking about this thing and about how to solve it and about how to work through it. And she says, that's silent treatment. Iyanla says, that's silent treatment. And what I can tell you about silent treatment is that it's emotional violence. They talk about where this comes from, and it goes back to a pathology with her own mom, a dynamic within her own mom, is that, her mom, Erica's mom, when growing up, was not a safe person to be around. Alcoholic, dysfunctional, both mom and dad. Erica grew up in that kind of home. So she wants to create some and maintain some kind of control in her home. And in that role of having grown up in a home where dysfunctional things around alcohol and whatever else were going on, she could not speak up. She consequently took up the role of enabler. And so in her home, she kind of sets it up that such that whatever is going wrong is not spoken about. When her kids say, Mom, just listen, she sets it up in such a way then that people don't tell her the truth. She says she saw Lexi's drinking, and she saw that within her mom and dad. But she's never really spoken up to Lexi about it. But what she does is silent treatment. What she does is what Ian is calling emotional violence. And I know what I can relate to this in the sense of, a parent, because they don't know how to approach something, they pretend as if it's not there. And even that in itself is violence, because it sounds as though Lexi is signaling that something is wrong with her behavior, is crying out for help in some form, shape, or way, using alcohol, and is in some kind of trouble in terms of just wanting to be able to feel like herself, to feel free to be herself around her parents. And it's a cry for help, and it's a cry to be heard. Yet the response, particularly from Erica, the mother, is based on her history and a pathology that she gained from her own history and her own dynamic with her own mother, that I don't talk about the dysfunction that goes on. What I'm going to do is try and control you so that I can try keep you from harm. Except she's not, Alexis is not out of harm's way. She's in harm's way. So she's, going back to the question that Iyanla asked, are you disconnected from yourself or are you dishonest? She's actually being dishonest about what is actually going on, because her need, based on her wound, her mother wound, her parent wound, her home of origin wound, is I want to control things so that everything looks the way that I want it to look, and I'm going to enable or overlook or pretend as if whatever else does not go with that picture is not there, which is a form of violence, because someone could be asking for help, could be shouting for help, could be crying out for help through this kind of behavior, particularly your child, and you are pretending as if they're not doing what they're doing. You are enabling them by just overlooking it and looking at the clouds, as opposed to, okay, I found you passed out, drunk in the passage. What's going on? So the next day, by the way, just going back to the conversation that Iyanla had with Patrick, Iyanla sends Patrick to the hotel. I believe a lot of Fix My Life is women's ministry. It's a healing process for women, and Iyanla is very careful not to step into that realm of now trying to speak to the healing of men, or step on the toes of those men. So she sends him back to the hotel and says, if you need any support from my team, uh, I can see you going through a hard time. If you need any support from my team, call us and we will have somebody, come up and assist you. We'll have you back, but for right now, go back to the hotel. Let me speak to the women. Because again, this pathology that's coursing through the family is being carried through, particularly the mother, as a result of her own relationship, Erica's relationship with her mother, who's now suffering from dementia and had just been living with her but has just moved out of her house in 2019. So the next day, Iyanla meets with Erica first, after a night. After the night, she meets with people again, meets with them, and they get into this conversation about unresolved wounds with her mother, and how they show up in her mothering. I think also how they show up in how she is a spouse to her husband. She says with her husband that she feels lonely and that there's no romance in the way that it used to be when they first got married. It's just not that way anymore. And again, feels like roommates. And and she feels lonely because the conversations are really based around the practicalities, bills, about problems, about the children. So she's become this control freak because she grew up in a home where there was substance abuse. This control freakness nature about her that makes people walk on eggshells about her and not show up as their true selves around her, is her way of protecting, but from the little girl who was stuck in a home that was unsafe. But now that's a kind of energy that needs to be transmuted to a different kind of protection, not a protection from woundedness, but a protection from love, a protection from a secure kind of place. As I have taught my children what they need to know, I have imparted, I have poured, I have equipped, I have trained. And if I'm protective because there's love. I'm not protecting because I'm responding from trauma. I'm protecting because I am on standby to, continue to be a steward that protects their children. So this is the conversation with Erica that Iyanla has where, again, her actions today within her family, how she mothers her daughters, is connected to her history. That's revealed in this conversation. And so the next thing that happens is that they now go to that breakfast table where Leilani, the oldest, who's 32 years old, comes to meet with the mother, Erica, to have a clearing conversation with the mom. Leilani wants to be treated like a grown human being, like a grown woman, whether she's in her mother's household or not. She wants to be treated like a grown woman. And, if her decisions aren't the way Erica likes, then it's not a good, it's not a good decision. But she doesn't want to feel like, okay, I'm an adult, I'm making decisions, my mom doesn't like it. Maybe it's not a good decision, but now she gets angry at me because she's trying to control me, because she's trying to protect me, but she's actually responding from trauma and unfinished business with her own mother, who's my grandmother. You know what I mean? Leilani says that this makes her feel incapable, as if she's not able to make correct decisions. But also I would say that kind of thing makes you incapable, like you're not able to take when things go wrong based on a misstep in your decisions. Like when you're 32 years old and you don't make a great decision, but you were convinced it was the best decision for yourself at the time. You want your parent to be able to say in their minds, well, I can see that this is not a great decision that this person is making, but you know what? I believe they've got what it takes to be able to handle and be capable to handle the backlash from this not so great decision, and be able to recover and change course and get back into course towards something that is good decisions, wise decisions, etc. Iyanla says, even if you give advice to your children, they may not take it because they're adults. And they may not take it because they see it different. And they're adults. And they have a right to see things different and be adults and not be given the silent treatment because they don't take your opinions and they don't take your advice. They're adults, they're grown, they have a right to say, thank you for that unsolicited advice. I don't think I will be taking it. Or thank you for that unsolicited advice. I think it's actually kind of cool advice. I might try that, But when you are parenting grown children, you are not there to force your advice. You are there when you are asked to then show up as consultant. And even when you show up as consultant, the final decision lays with your adult child because they're an adult and they have a choice to say yay, nay, maybe to whatever advice is given to them because they have to live with whatever it is that they go with. You don't have to, as the parent, they have to live with it. And that's the thing. It's like when somebody gets mad at you that you didn't take their advice, it's like, I don't have to live. You don't have to live with them, with the consequences of them not taking their, advice, unless you have to. And I think I understand that. But I think the largest part of it is that you don't have to live with the consequences of someone going with their own mind and their own understanding and their own perception, and then that doesn't work out. For the most part, another person doesn't have to live with that. It's the person that made those decisions that has to live with that. So control them for what? Control them for what? You don't have to live with that. Then Leilani says that she needed Erica to stand on her own emotionally and didn't want her to call herself sensitive because Leilani is the sensitive one in the family. So Leilani says, it's almost like she feels like she's wrong for being the sensitive child. And Iyanla chirps in as well and says, what if she's an empath, So to tell her not to be sensitive is to tell her not to be herself. Again, because Erica's thinking to be sensitive in an environment where there's alcoholism and there's all this dysfunction. Her response is from her own trauma and her own history that's not resolved within herself. So she's saying, if I was sensitive in the environment that I grew up in, I would have been chewed up and eaten alive and spit out. But she's not aware that she's not in that environment and Leilani is not in that environment. And so Leilani is probably in a safer environment to be sensitive and be herself. Iyanla says, Leilani is the heart of the family and feels what the family won't acknowledge and talk about. So it's not a curse that she's actually sensitive. It's actually a helpful thing because then there's a sense of perception that she has. And that can then call things what they are, And I believe that it's interesting that Leilani called herself the black sheep. These people that are kind of the afterthought in families, or black sheep or whatever in families, are the most perceptive people in the family dynamic, and they're the ones who actually escape the family dynamic because they're most sensitive to what's actually really going on, and they're most truthful. They're the truth tellers. They're the ones who are willing to call a spade and call a thing. And the dynamic, because people are in their own traumas from their own backgrounds that they haven't resolved, is set up that this sensitive person who's perceptive, who's the truth teller, is put in a position to not be authentic, to be distorted in the view of themselves and their great quality, to be able to be this instinctive and this in tune, is kind of dismissed or overlooked and undermined because it really reveals what's actually going on. This conversation with Leilani ends with, Erica telling Leilani that she's proud of Leilani because she's brave and takes risks and is not afraid to do, things that have not been done before, and she lands on her feet. But what follow, but also adds to that, you know, the story to now both Leilani and Alexis. So Alexis is also invited into the breakfast meeting, the tea breakfast meeting. And Erica begins then to tell her story to both daughters, Alexis and Leilani, some of the things that she's discovered since yesterday. That about her story, that, you know, she grew up in this unstable environment, you know, abusive kind of mother, critical mother, alcohol in the environment, unsafe environment, the kind of environment that was unpredictable. So this need for control comes from that. And Erica realizes that she's a control freak, and sees that her daughters are scared to tell her something to avoid backlash, you know. And she's like, I need more information about this. And they give her more like examples about, when this happened, you were mad in this way, and we felt like we couldn't talk to you. When that happened, you were mad in this way, and we felt like we couldn't talk this way. And, you know, they're walking on eggshells around their mother, because she has this need for, it needs to be under control, because her environment growing up was not under her control, and she was victim to it. You know, it was imposed onto her. Now that she has her own home, and she has her own marriage, and she has her own home and her own daughters, she can control everybody, so that she's never put in a position where she feels like her environment is a threat to her. Again, she hasn't healed from it. She hasn't resolved it within herself and with the people that it involves, her father and her mother. Iyanla suggests that, okay, why not just let everyone have their feelings and tell their feelings? And if the daughters don't like what you have to say, Erica, in your house, then they don't have to like it, but they can leave your home, because ultimately it's her home, you know. And continues then to ask them, when are you, both of you, 26-year-old and 32-year-old, moving out of home? And Alex is like, well, I guess I have to make a plan. And I mean, Leilani says, I guess I have to start making a plan. And Alexis says she's moving out with a current boyfriend that she's been with for 3 months. And this man is going to pick her up from the airport. And so Iyanla's like, and Erica's, you know, Erica's, the mother's reaction is like, for real? You know, Erica's reaction is absolutely unimpressed. And Iyanla's like, but this is a 26-year-old. It's not for you to be impressed or unimpressed. Just be happy. This is good news. This is someone leaving your house. This is an adult who's telling you good news. And she seems excited about this man and this thing that's happening in her life. Why are you not excited that your daughter has met someone, and they've met someone's family, and this daughter has felt accepted in that family, and all is good as far as you know? Why are you not excited about this? Why must she not tell you how she feels, what's going on in her life? Why must she act like a child even though she's 26 years old in your home? And Iyanla's trying to find out, are you not impressed because you weren't told? You know, again, it goes back to that thing of being controlling, with these alcoholic parents that she grew up with, because she felt unsafe. And then she confesses that she didn't know how to be a mother because her mother didn't know how to mother her. Particularly, she says she didn't know how to be a mother to adults because her mother didn't know how to mother her. And those mother wounds, I just think those parent wounds, if you do not deal with them, whether you deal with them with the person that caused you the wound, or just imagining that they're there and seated in a chair and you tell them how you feel, they don't go away until you work through them. And until you uproot something, it just finds another form to morph into, and it flows into the next generation. And I think that's in particularly how you parent, how you approach things. In the instance of Erica, it's about how she parents. And yeah, and I thought that was interesting.